Within with Dr. Azadeh Khatibi. This time of COVID chaos and confusion has shaped our relationships with each other. In the cauldron of COVID, our relationships have been challenged with frayed nerves and tension and loss, but also joy and togetherness and deepening connection and understanding. I am a firm believer in challenge being the source for growth and understanding, and also the power of taking a negative and turning it into a positive. In that spirit, today we're going to be talking about relationships and how we can grow as individuals and partners in all of our relationships, not just romantic ones, but family, friends, and work colleagues. Joining us today on that journey is psychologist Dr. Chris Regan. Dr. Regan has a master's degree and a doctoral degree in clinical psychology. He's a trauma and stressor-related disorder specialist, an addictive disorder specialist, and a substance use disorder-related specialist. His doctoral dissertation involved extensive research on childhood sexual abuse and subsequent mental health issues, such as mood disorders and specifically trauma and PTSD disorder. Dr. Regan also received special training through the Betty Ford Center, the Milton H. Erickson Foundation, and the Colin A. Ross Institute for Psychological Trauma. He's worked in both outpatient and inpatient residential treatment settings, including with chronically homeless veterans with chemical dependency and chronic mental illness. He is a great guide in helping us explore this issue of relationships. I am so excited and delighted that he joins us today. Welcome, Dr. Regan.
Well, thank you, Doctor. That was a wonderful intro, and I'm really excited to be here and hope my message will reach people who need to hear it.
Thank you. So I guess to start off with, we have good depictions on television and in media on what unhealthy relationships look like, but sometimes we're in them and we don't even recognize that we're in one. Or that there are habits and behaviors that we're exhibiting in our relationships that are unhealthy. So I'd love to kind of start our conversation by looking at what an unhealthy relationship looks like and kind of comparing it to what a healthy relationship looks like. And then I think there's a lot of us that are kind of in okay relationships, somewhere in between. So what do healthy, unhealthy, okay relationships, how do they compare and contrast?
Well, I think it has almost everything to do with emotions and how an individual feels. If I'm comfortable, if I feel safe, if I feel that my needs are being met, if I'm satisfied, those would be signs that it's a good relationship. If there's loneliness in a relationship, which can occur, if the communication, if you don't feel heard, if you are really trying to get your needs met and it's not happening, I think at that point you would know very clearly that the relationship is not good. But again, some people are kind of taught to settle for unhealthy relationships from previous experiences or childhood experiences.
What do you mean by previous experiences or childhood experiences leading them to settle into unhealthy patterns in their current relationships?
Well, abusers were abused. That's scientifically researched and validated. So unfortunately, that's an example that is pretty clear if a man grows up in a home where there was physical abuse, domestic violence. His dad hit his mom. He may still believe that that's okay to do.
And it's not necessarily even a conscious belief that that's okay to do, but it's kind of ingrained as his way or her way of behaving, so that it just becomes their way of being in the world when they get frustrated or upset. Is that?
Absolutely, that's it. It is the way of being, but of course, there's so much psychological underpinning that allows that to be. Other messaging that that individual, male or female, heard when they were growing up.
What about relationships where it's not like overt abuse, but people's needs aren't being met? They're just like not happy, but it's not a horrible relationship, like that okay state. What's going on there? I mean, I imagine from your definition, you're saying that even in those situations, somebody, they feel okay, their needs still aren't being met. It's not like an overt negative, but there's still something that's not being met. What does that look like, and how do we recognize that?
Well, again, I think it's very apparent to the person in that situation, but unfortunately, there are so many things that they won't think about. No one has a class in school about how to do relationships.
Yeah, right.
We're never taught how to do healthy relationships. The only schooling, if you will, or education we get as far as how to have a relationship is in what we've witnessed as we're growing up, what we're exposed to, and that's our class, that's our teacher. So it's so limited, and not everybody has the best teacher. So again, like I mentioned earlier, you may think that something that really is causing you discomfort is just the norm, and it's something wrong with you.
So what you say about, there's no class on relationship. We become adults, or our parents realize that maybe they're not doing such a good job and they take us to the teacher, which may be a psychologist, therapist, or spiritual leader, teacher. But in general, I think there's like the adverse childhood events study that showed like 60-70% of people grow up with like a real negative stressor in childhood, whether it's divorce, a family member going to jail, sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. When I look at that study, I realize that the majority of people are growing up with significant, I'm kind of extrapolating here, but like significant negative ways of being modeled for them. And that's concerning to me because it kind of shows us, at least to me, and you would know better, like that we are living in a society that is where people are growing up without models of healthy relationships.
Well, that's a good observation, and obviously it is very accurate and a huge challenge. And there are, where do you begin? If you have a family, if it's a two-parent family with children, hopefully the two parents are able to communicate between themselves and address the challenges they may be having with their child. Maybe their child witnessed an accident in the street and someone was hit by a car and killed. That is a traumatic situation. That child will be really shaken up. And how do the parents support that child? Do they know how to do it themselves, or do they have to find a therapist right away? Uh, Helping communication and loving nurturing will bring the child through in 90% of the cases. Resilience is an interesting thing to look at when we talk about the study you mentioned. The people that do well have resilience.
So you were mentioning that the child, if they see a traumatic thing, they need to have that process for them, either through the parent, or if the parent doesn't know how to do it, to bring in a specialist. I remember just growing up, and I went through war, immigration, like a lot of stuff. And what was kind of the way of being was we didn't really, people got really upset. Then we talked about their, I or somebody got really upset. Then we talked about feelings, and it wasn't in the best way, I don't think. But a lot of the stuff, going through war and being bombarded, that deep stuff, it just happened, and we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about the emotions related to it. And so like, I just see from my own childhood, it really set me up to just be like, okay, if something negative happens, you just kind of let it go, and it wasn't a letting go. It was like, pushing down. What happens when you push down emotions like that in a child or an adult? Um,
Um, Pushing the emotions down and not reacting to what you're feeling is usually, in the long run, harmful. The situation you described made me think that at some point or somewhere in your understanding, there was hope. I think that you were able to get through all those things because somewhere in your mind you knew, well, there is a way out of this. There is a better day ahead. There's a better place I'll be. Otherwise, you may have just turned really dark and uh, inward and not been successful in life.
yeah, I always held on to that glimmer of hope. And that was modeled for me too, right? My parents kind of modeled that, which was very helpful. Speaking of parents and modeling, I know you work with the Imago, and it involves like how we were parented. Can you tell us about that and what our Imago is? For me,
Hmm.
the Imago concept was something really powerful that I learned about.
Hmm. The Imago relationship therapy was created by Harville Hendricks, who wrote a best-selling book, I guess, in the 80s, called Getting the Love You Want. And he developed Imago relationship therapy from that. And the Imago is this image that we have in our minds of a person, maybe a mom or a dad or somebody that we like to be with. And these images are very, very powerful. We pick up information as we're growing up from our parents, good information and not so good information, and that's collected. And as we sort through, we want to keep the good and get rid of the bad. But our brain at times says, well, that bad one, maybe we can have a different experience with that. Maybe it doesn't have to have a negative outcome in the long run. And the mind will cause them to select a partner who exhibits the negative behavior of one of their parents that they want to have a reparative experience with. And they'll be attracted to that person, they'll become a couple, and then, they have their imago. That's the image of the person they want.
So it's kind of interesting. I'd heard someone say that like we end up picking the person who's bad for us. And that's kind of an extreme way of talking about what you're talking about, which is that we tend to pick the person that pushes our buttons, like the good buttons and the bad buttons. That is like you're in relationship with them, that the parts of you that you want to feel good, they exhibit. But then there's also negative things that about how you were brought up with negative behaviors in your parents that they're also exhibiting. And you're also exhibiting the negative behavior of your own parents. Is
Mhm.
that, do I have it right? Kind of?
Yes, absolutely. And it sounds complicated, but actually, if you kind of know the road that it takes, you can follow it and watch as it happens.
I know it was super powerful for me to realize that there were parts of I thought I was very separate from my parents and I knew better than them and I'm doing things. But then, of course, then you realize, oh, no, I'm repeating very similar patterns that some of, both good and bad that like my parents had exhibited. And they didn't know any better, right? Just like I'm parenting and I've gotten some good things that I passed on to my kid and some not so great things that I'm like now recognizing, being like, oh, I need to work on that with her before I send her off into the world. But it's really powerful to realize that like I was attracted to my husband because there was something familiar about him that made me want to warm up to him, aside from the fact that he was good looking. Because he exhibited some really great behaviors that I associated with my childhood and I wanted, and also he also was kind of a different way of being than I was used to. There was an excitement there too. So it's kind of the yin and yang of it, the familiarity of your childhood, but also something new, different than your childhood. But in the end, you repeat same patterns. It's powerful stuff.
It really is. And it goes back to, if only we were taught about healthy relationships.
Right.
If only. But unfortunately, that just is not the case. Most people don't have an understanding. And I think it's even so interesting. Many years ago, I had a friend who suggested when I use the word relationship to put the word healthy in front of it. And what an impact that made on me. I always remember that, and always strive to make the clarification that what we're striving for is a healthy relationship. Most of us are experts at unhealthy relationships, but healthy relationships, very few people can even describe what it is.
Wow, which is why I wanted to like talk about it in the very beginning, like what is a healthy relationship? So talking more about that, it's something where you feel heard, loved, you have good feelings in that relationship, or I mean, but negative feelings are inevitable in relationships, aren't they? Or you're not always supposed to feel happy, right? Tell us more,
Right.
Dr. Regan.
No, no, of course, what you're talking about balance. Just in life, there are ups and downs. Situations are cyclical, go in cycles. And life is all trial and error. That's just it. We don't get the manual on life. We fall down over the block and we get up again and we go, okay, I'm not gonna trip on that again. It's all trial and error. And so we make mistakes. And hopefully we learn how to deal with making mistakes. The sad thing to think about is some children are, criticized if they make a mistake,
Right.
and they may be shamed or degraded,
How
and
many
that
of us grew up with that? So many people, I mean, even our school system still and our parenting system still have like this criticism, or our coaches. Like I remember being coached in volleyball, it was just an air of criticism as opposed to noticing and then giving feedback and guidance in a positive way.
that's so true. And when you think about it, the bigger the mistake, the bigger the lesson. If I make a big mistake at work and my boss points it out, uh, you know, I may feel uncomfortable at the time, but I probably never make that mistake again.
Right, right. Speaking of work and our relationships at work, can we use the Imago to have better relationships at work?
Well, if you have an understanding of it, or if people don't even understand that there's something called attraction, that we are attracted to people for various reasons. Uh, 95% of the people in the world don't ever hear anything about there's this thing called attraction, and you are attracted to people for various reasons. So, of course, it happens at work very strongly. There's no difference.
So then at work, somebody will hire me because I remind them of their mother.
Could be.
Wow.
Uh,
Wow.
yeah, yeah, that can happen.
Or we choose to work with people that, or it could be that, they had a chaotic upbringing. And so then they choose to work with people who are calmer, even on a subconscious level, because that was like really difficult for them. I mean,
Hmm.
so it kind of works both ways. But I read this great, or I heard about this great study recently that talked about like people tend to hire people who are like them or that they like. But the problem is that they should actually be looking for people that are complementary to them, that kind of related to what we're talking about, but also a little bit different. That people that they should be hiring people who are complementary to them, so that they fulfill. They look at the world differently. That they have a different skill set. That they approach a problem in a different way than you do. Because if you hire a carbon copy of yourself, then it doesn't. The organization doesn't grow.
Hmm.
It's kind of an aside, but it's interesting to me. So, how about using the Imago to improve our relationship with our kids? And so when I mean the Imago, but just using and for me, Imago is like an understanding of who we are based on the great things about our parents and the not so great habits and behaviors that our parents exhibited for us. And now we're using both of them. And the way you explained it is that, you had a negative behavior that you were taught in childhood or was modeled for you in childhood, right? And then you, when you're met with a similar circumstance in adulthood, then your brain says, hey, try this approach because it's the familiar approach and might work, but it's really, of course, very negative and devolves. How do we use that understanding of our upbringing and how it affects who we are now, and the tools we have in our toolbox, the good and the bad tools or approaches? How does that affect how do we use that to kind of become better parents?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just start with this. When I meet with younger people that aren't married yet or just together in a relationship, and if they're thinking about starting a family and having children, I emphatically suggest that they investigate parenting classes.
Right.
There are many resources available under the guise of parenting classes. And you do a little research and find out what's available nearby or what works for you. Some people live in a faith community. They might like to use a resource there. But that's one very important thing that, again, is overlooked by, I think, parents to be all the time. And that might just allow them to see what I'm really getting to is that if people know to look at the family setting when they were growing up, when they learn that if they want to know what kind of parents they're going to be, all they have to do is look at their parents.
Right.
And they will see, this is the kind of parent I'm going to be. And anybody who many people say, I never want to do that like my mother. I never want
all
to
the
do that.
time. You hear that all the time.
Right. But the reality is that, so sorry, you have no choice. It's like if you're dipped in vinegar, you're going to smell like vinegar. It's
Right.
you can't change that. But knowing ahead of time that this is the type of parenting that I was raised with, and this is the type of parent I'm going to be, you have a heads up. And if something is concerning, you can get some help or reach out or read up on it and know that you have a choice to go in your own direction.
I think it's really interesting that most people don't know anything about child psychology, and yet they have children. And I would never force someone to do something in terms of having to take a parenting class, obviously. But I think it's very good before you embark upon anything, especially child rearing and bringing up another human being, to have an understanding of how a child's brain works and how it's different and how you can help nurture it. For example, I used to just be like, well, kids need to do chores. And I used to have my young ones do it was not giant chores, but they were little ones. I'd be like, you need to do that now. And they would get super frustrated until I learned actually, and I learned this from a child psychologist, I learned, no, you have to children do much better if you kind of start the task with them or show them. And I was like, it's a simple task though, but they said, no, you need to kind of make them feel like they're one with you. And you're kind of a team and you're supporting them instead of just having a to-do. That's child psychology. And I wish I'd known a lot more than I do. I mean, I know a lot more now because I embarked on that learning process, but it really does affect the trajectory of how your child feels about things. To have a parent who knows how the child's brain works versus not.
Mm-hmm.
And the child's success as they grow into adulthood and their success with relationships.
Right.
So talking more about, as adults, there's an ad by Harvard Hendricks actually, where he says, talking is the most dangerous thing we do. Talking is the most dangerous thing we do. And I think that's a little bit of an inflammatory statement, but I think what he's saying is he's trying to point to the danger of talking is, when you open your mouth, you can potentially trigger the other person, right? And then things can devolve, whether it's in a romantic relationship, a relationship between a parent and a child, or a work relationship. Communication is so integral. But how do we talk in a way where things don't devolve in a relationship? right? You could just keep your mouth shut, and lots of people sometimes do that around certain people because they don't want to trigger them or make them angry. But that's not really a healthy relationship because your needs aren't being met. How do we have better communication and not trigger each other, especially around COVID and like, discussions around race and diversity and inclusion and whether to mask, whether not to mask, whether to vaccinate, whether not to vaccinate. There's a lot of tension people are holding in. How do we have these healthy conversations?
Well, what a great point, and what a great question. The top of the list for me, relationship wise, is how anger shows up in relationships, and how much anger is being held by either of the partners in a relationship, and if they know how to do anything about their anger. Because otherwise, they're going to do what you're saying. They're going to project their anger onto you, their partner, whoever's the closest. When a person is angry, it doesn't matter. They have to project it onto someone. And if it's the UPS guy delivering, or the lawnmower repair guy, or your spouse, they're going to get it because you have to let go of that anger. And often it's displaced anger too. You're angry at the boss at work and you bring it home and you're angry with your partner. So if of course, maybe that's just a whole different conversation, but that is the cause of so much negative communication, saying the wrong things, not understanding what they're saying, because the emotion is the emotion of anger. I often say you could be an expert on a subject of woodworking and know every corner, every possible way to do it right, and if you are angry, you get some bad news or something hurts you, emotion overrides intellect every time. No
Emotion
matter
overrides intellect every time.
no matter how wise or educated or smart an individual is with a particular subject or situation, all of that knowledge is overridden by emotion.
So,
Disappointment, fear, anger.
so that doesn't mean though that we are slaves to our emotions, and if we get angry, we are going to project it. There's better ways to handle the emotion, right? Is that
Right? But that's something that I don't think anyone has ever heard these words ever put together. It's called the appropriate expression of anger.
the appropriate expression of anger? So anger is okay to have as long as you are processing it in a healthy way and you're expressing it in an appropriate way. Tell us more about appropriate expression of anger.
Well, anger is one of all of the human emotions. No one can say I don't get angry. It's just not possible unless you had neurological damage. Actually, a traumatic brain injury can cause that. But
Constant
uh,
happens.
yeah, typically, again, it taps into something you mentioned earlier, in previous generations and previous cultural influences, would tell children, you don't show us any anger. We are not happy with anger. Parents and grandparents, they'll say, if a little boy comes in crying, he got hurt, and his sister poked him in the ribs, and they'll say, hey, cut that out. Stop crying. Go back to your room and don't come back out here till you stop crying.
Oh,
There, the message is that we don't like emotions, and we don't like it so much that we'll send you away if you display your emotions to us. So the second that that little boy gets in that room, his life is altered. His life is changed because he says, "Oh, I cannot go out there." And next time he gets hurt and he's crying, he can't go for help to his mom or grandma or dad. He has to stop that, and
repress his
that's the
anger,
beginning.
repress his
Yes,
sadness, repress his frustration.
his need for nurturance, his need for caring, all of those things. It can begin like that.
And you can live your life. Now you've learned that that's what you need to do in order to be accepted and survive in a family situation. Then you live your life in your family, in your education, in your workplaces, just stuffing your emotions. And, that is just a ticking time bomb. In my viewpoint as a doctor, it's a ticking time bomb for the manifestation of physical disease. And then it can come out sideways, right? Repressed anger doesn't just stay repressed. It can come out in physical disease, but it can also come out in someone exploding finally after repressing in their relationships at work or at home. It comes out sideways too. So then what are the steps for us? I mean, are there rules for communicating in a healthy way when we get triggered?
Well, if you take care of yourself and you are healthy physically and emotionally and spiritually, if you feel good about yourself, you will be aware of the need and your choice to not hurt another person. And projecting anger, pent up anger, onto another person in an inappropriate way would be harmful to them.
What is projection? What is, for the people who don't know what projection is or have never heard of it, what is projection? What is projection of anger or other emotions?
So when I'm angry, it's an emotion that I'm uncomfortable with. And my brain, my psyche says, well, you can get rid of some of this by just projecting it, by dumping it onto another person. Just shoot it over there and tell them all about the hurt and the mistreatment you experienced and being unheard and overlooked. Just give it to them and get it out of our psyche. And that's what you do. You project it onto another person. And like I said, it's usually just whoever's there. It doesn't matter. Anyone will do.
I mean, I used to do this to my husband all the time, after working a long day and then commuting an hour and a half, just be filled with the tension of the day. I'd also be drained. I had no energy. So first of all, I would get very triggered very fast. Like some little things would bother me and I would blow it up into a big deal. And then I was frustrated. So then I would project it onto him. It was like a release mechanism to put it on him. Why are there socks underneath the table and da 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 da, and it shouldn't be that. It was a release mechanism, and it just creates negativity within you. I don't, it's releasing, but it's the more you release it, that circuitry keeps growing, right? And then it also creates negativity within that relationship. So then we have to know how to appropriately communicate. What was it? Would you call it appropriate what of anger?
Expression.
Appropriate. We have to know how to appropriately express our anger.
Which includes the method and also when and where. A healthy couple who has been in couples therapy might learn, specifically like you're talking about, when you come home from work, you need to kind of work this up, plan this out, talk to your partner and say, when I come home from work, I really feel like I'd like to share a little bit about my day, just maybe 10 or 15 minutes of what I went through today. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to allow me to just tell you. And I also want to tell you that I'm not looking for any fixes. I'm not looking for any advice about the situations. So there's no pressure there. I'm just asking if you can listen for 10 or 15 minutes after I come home. Is that okay? Is that something you're comfortable with doing? So a healthy couple can have that conversation and then they'll decide, well, sure, okay, I can do that. And then sometimes one of the partners comes home from work and the person who was there all day possibly wants to tell them before they even put their keys down on the table. You'll never believe what happened all day today. I was there. And, that person would really like maybe 5 or 10 minutes to take his jacket off or change shoes and just breathe a little bit. And then they would be completely willing to hear their partner's experience of the day. But it's timing and it's communicating how to make that work. And then that would be the appropriate expression.
so that so instead of just sitting in your anger, being like, oh my God, like he just barrages me with, how his day went all day, the moment he gets home, and it just drives me nuts. And then you shout, or you just say like, what are you doing? Like, can't you tell I just want to rest, or it's so loud, or whatever. You instead, it requires some self-knowledge, Dr. Regan, self-awareness, and also some extra time. Instead of living life on automatic, you have to stop and be like, where am I? What are my needs? What are my partner's needs? If you can tell, if not, you need to ask them. And then to have that discussion. And if you notice it's getting charged, to kind of stop and come back at a later time. This requires, like I say, it requires self-awareness time and work on yourself, and kind of taking time to know the other person and who they are and what their needs are.
Yeah. So that all goes back to having an idea of what relationship means. And like you said, relationship isn't inherent, that we just fall into it in life as an adult, and we know how to have a healthy relationship. You have a healthy relationship by learning what relationships are.
Right.
A relationship is another full-time job. A person
A
who goes
relationship is another full-time job, because I remember Donald Trump, and I don't want to get political, but a politician or someone saying, I kept telling my wife before I divorced her, like, it shouldn't be work. A relationship, she would tell me, like, relationships are work, and he'd say, no, it shouldn't be work. So, but you're saying it's a full-time job. Our society is not set up for that. Everybody you often have now 2-parent households, kids are in daycare, not all families, of course, but this is like the norm that we see a lot on TV. And we see in our reality, people are working, people put their kids in childcare, and then they come home, and then they're rushing to make dinner, and the breakfast is also rushed, and then they might rushing to make lunchtime, lunches for the next day, and then they have to also exercise or whatever, if they make time for it. Does our modern society even have time for this extra job of like having healthy relationships? Is it possible?
Well, unfortunately, they find out the hard way. It's just like having a car, an old gas engine car, and if you don't put any gas in it, it's going to stop. If you don't put oil into it, it's going to explode. The motor's going to stop. If you don't have air in the tires, so it's just maintenance. It's being aware of what you have to put into this vehicle for your sharing, your loving. It's a vehicle, and it needs to get the proper maintenance.
Maintenance and service, and then time to enjoy it, right? Go for the drive. Go for
Put
the
down the
drive.
top. Yes, that's
With
right.
the top down, wind in your hair. I love it. So speaking to kind of go back a little bit on our conversation with that communication. So I had a colleague of mine say, I mentioned to him, I noticed that we have very different communication styles. And I used to have his communication style, and I've changed. I don't know if it's for better or for worse. I know that there's people who, it's important to know your communication style, I think. And because some people like to give all the details and then give the, final conclusion. Other people start with the final conclusion and then they give all the details. And if you have two people who, one likes a conclusion first, one likes a conclusion last, there can be conflict there. Then there's also people who like to talk and not be interrupted, versus people who interrupt to kind of make interjections and make points and refute things. And I noticed this colleague and I couldn't finish what I was saying and get my point across because he would interject. And I was like, I can't talk this way. And he's like, well, I like to make quips. So there was a power struggle in that communication style. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's scientific research for many years has supported the understanding that men and women have different styles of communication right off the bat. Men usually want to make the point right away. Women, they want to give you the details and set it up, and so you'll get it when they deliver the point. And so those two styles are inherent based on gender. And of course, not everybody is exactly like that. but research has shown that those styles are different. So you have to first look, well, now if your colleague was a woman, you may not have had that difficulty because she would be more aware and wanting to hear the details first and then the point of your message.
So what do? Do you just say, okay, well, we just have different communication styles, we can't work together?
No, I think if you wanted to work with that person, it you would have to ask yourself, well, let's see, can I just give my point first, and then the details to support it? You know, is that something that I can adapt to?
Right.
It might be a superior, an important person in your work team, where you know communicating is tremendously important. If you can't communicate with them, you may lose your job. So you might want to
Right.
just adjust the way you deliver that message.
What about people who interrupt to refute you? You're like, you're trying to make a point and they're, because at least from my perspective, it's if you're constantly interrupting to make your point, you're not really listening to that other person.
That's
You're,
true.
but I mean, what are your thoughts on that? That's my perspective. Maybe your perspective sounds like your perspective is similar, but I, I'd love to hear more.
Well, it's you know that falls on another element of communication that is a foundation of communication and often not talked about, setting a boundary.
Setting a
Talking
boundary.
to that person and saying, you know, I truly respect, you know, your knowledge and wisdom, the way that you are able to support us as a group. I'm wondering if you could think about letting me finish telling you what I'm trying to tell you before you offer some feedback. That would help me a lot because I want to communicate clearly and completely, and unfortunately, when I'm cut off, I get a little bit distracted. So I want to make sure that I communicate to you all of the best information that I have, and I'm wondering if you can respect this.
Right. I remember in my younger days, and I used to be a much smarter person than I am now, but in my younger days, in my medical training, I remember being an intern and I had lots of ideas, taking care of lots of patients, and I was talking to an ICU nurse, and she was giving me her perspective, and it was kind of related to the patient, but not really. So I thought it was a little bit more conversational, and I interjected and I was like, oh, you know, the same thing, da da da, to kind of, I wanted to build a commonality. And she said, excuse me, I'm talking, you know, but not in a rude way, but in a firm way. And I took it so personally, and I was not insulted, I was hurt, I was semi insulted. It's like, I'm trying to connect with her and she's just, you know, kind of made me stop. And then with the wisdom of time, I realized, no, she was right. If I'm Even if I'm trying to say something to connect to her, I'm not really fully listening. I'm not fully present to her. And in a medical setting, even though it wasn't really ultimately super related to the patient, in a medical setting, it's even more important to be fully aware and fully present to what the other person is saying, especially if you're really smart and your mind goes really fast and you've all these ideas. That even pulls you away from the present moment even more. So it's a practice to come. Now I have a lot of respect for her in putting up a boundary and saying, excuse me, let me finish my thought. I think that was she wasn't mean about it. That was a great lesson for me. I was
Mhm,
young, didn't know it as well.
mhm,
Hopefully we can teach our children to communicate better so that they learn these skills before they get into professional settings. Right? I mean, this is what we should be teaching children in homes, in schools, how to talk to people, how to get along with people, different communication styles. How do we can, because I think that is how we can grow healthier relationships and get more done in terms of progress, but also be happier and healthier and more joyous as people, which ultimately
mhm,
has outcomes for our communities and our health physically, and our mental health.
mhm.
Um, then what are the absolute no-nos in a relationship? Like when a couple comes to you or family comes to you, or like, what are behaviors where you would set a boundary and say, no, in a relationship, like you just have to stop these behaviors. This doesn't work.
Mhm. Well, number one, of course, is any type of abuse. And often that can be generational, that can be cultural. It can be taught that this is acceptable in our culture. But when I am presented with an individual or couple who is physically with their hands hitting or pushing or grabbing their partner, that's off the table. Even harshness as far as yelling goes. And some people yell and scream, and whoever's the loudest wins at that moment. And
Right. It's whoever is the loudest. I mean, you see this in New York and the streets, like move your car and I'm not going to move, like the loudness is like, it's like an assertion of power.
Yes, and it seems like, well, that I'll obliterate the other person. I'll make them into, yeah, I can't hear them if I'm louder.
And you've
So
won the argument then.
exactly,
But of course you've lost. You're losing.
right. So that's definitely one. And unfortunately, people aren't aware of this. Even in how people speak with each other, condescension,
Condescension,
criticism,
criticism,
judgment. Mhm.
judgment.
You
So
know,
we're talking about physical abuse, verbal abuse, shouting, yelling. And then you can even say things in a soft voice, but if you're condescending, if you're speaking with contempt, if you're insulting the person, if you're labeling them, these are all no-nos.
name calling.
You're so lazy.
Right,
You're an idiot.
right.
You're mean. How about you're mean? Can we use that, or is that also a no-no?
Well, they're all judgments, and a judgment is something that you measure. A judgment is, well, it's good or bad. It's you're happy or you're sad, or you're helpful or you're not helpful. Um, it's all that measurement. If we can leave judgment out of most of our language, we would be so much better off.
So instead of saying, you're such a lazy employee, then what would or you make me so mad, or you're just, or whatever, what would the employer say to that employee? And I'm using that because I want to kind of talk about that I want to kind of underscore the power dynamic too.
Hmm.
How else do you speak instead of just labeling them or judging them?
Well, it's so interesting because when we talk about how do you speak, you have to also say, how do I listen? Because if you were going to take a course in communication, the first class would be on listening. It is the most important skill in communication. So if you're listening, you will communicate differently. You'll speak differently. But if a person is condescending or judgmental, you can say a very quick little response like, I'm sorry you feel that way. Or actually, that's not true. And you're not hurting their feelings, hopefully, and you're just making a statement. Concise, clear communication. Clear communication is where it's at and what works. So I don't know if that really answered your question.
I guess if someone is instead of judging someone, instead of saying you're so lazy, you would say, I imagine you would say, I noticed that you spent a large amount of time on that part of the project. I'm surprised because I would have imagined it would have taken a shorter amount of time. Can we talk about, how you're doing and what the needs of this project are? I don't know. I'm kind of making this stuff up.
Sure.
I'm seeing what your thoughts are on that.
So rather than evaluating the situation, you can go directly to the request without even throwing any judgment or evaluation out. There's no need for it. You can just clearly say, I'm wondering if you can try to do that in a shorter period of time. Or I'm wondering if you can move from this task to the next task without an interval of time. Making your request, because that's eventually where you're going to go anyway. So there's no need really for the previous statements. I think you're lazy. I think you're a person who doesn't like to work hard. That gets you nowhere.
That gets you nowhere. So even the stuff I was saying about, I noticed you took a large amount of time and I didn't think so. You don't even need to go there. We can just make our request in a clear, concise way and see what their response is. And hopefully that other person will also respond in a clear, concise way without projecting any emotions that come up. And if their emotions come up because their mother judged them or told them they had to go faster, and so now they're feeling resentment towards you, what do they do with that resentment before it comes out or, comes out sideways or gets repressed? They just feel that resentment.
They feel it and they process it.
And they process.
If they have a trusted confidant or a partner that they can speak with, where they can get another opinion. Was this person really calling me names and judging me? And because it's more heightened sensitivity of a childhood experience like that, a partner or a friend would say, well, that doesn't really sound critical. Maybe he was having a bad day, or maybe that person was, just didn't see the whole situation. So being flexible, giving the benefit of the doubt, and trying not to take it as personal.
So, the absolute no-nos that you talked about, the physical abuse, verbal abuse, shouting, yelling, contempt, judgment, criticism, do people stop those behaviors? Can they change? Do people change in your opinion? How hard is it? Can people be redeemed? Mm-hmm. Somebody who abuses their spouse, somebody who abuses their child?
Absolutely. It happens every day, every minute of every day. Wow. It's just a matter of awareness. It's not most times not mean-spirited, not malicious. It's just a habit, a bad habit that developed over a pretty big period of time. And it's the habit that was passed on to them. Mm-hmm. So when you realize that it's just a habit, and for many people, that's really just all it is. Habits are easy to break. As long as you bring it from your subconscious into your consciousness, that is the goal of awareness. And you can change that. And it does happen all the time. And if you, go ahead.
Oh, no. Please continue.
The only thing else I can say is if you think about how you would like to be treated, how you would like to be spoken to, and apply that to the way you speak to other people.
So in COVID time, one of my friends, she's a physician, and especially at the beginning of COVID, but it's probably not talked about as much, but it's probably still happening. Less so as things are opening up, but COVID really, she said every other patient she was seeing, she was sending to behavioral health. She was sending for therapy, for meds, whatever they needed. That was every other patient she was seeing. So people were not being their best selves individually or in relationships. She talked about one couple that was really devolved in terms of their interactions with each other now that they had to stay, especially in an enclosed space, and have to be with each other all the time. The negatives of their relationship showed themselves, and the negatives of how they were processing their emotions showed themselves. And, that in that COVID time, it definitely made things harder, right? So the relationships became more difficult. When we have a stressor in our lives, how do we prevent that from happening? When we have a big stressor like financial problems, job loss, having to just be with each other when we can't get along with each other a lot, like how do we deal with that?
Well, the first thing is, of course, making sure that we are taking care of ourselves to the best of our ability in the best possible way. Self-care makes such a difference. If I'm taking care of me, And at times you have personality types who are maybe more codependent, and their perception of self-care is giving yourself completely to the care of another person. It's
Sacrificing
on
yourself for others.
your detriment, right? Right. So self-care, and it is difficult. It's very challenging. I think your colleague was doing the right thing by sending them to behavioral health, even if it was an indication of increasing anxiety or depression, or picked up on a bad communication style or some anger. To catch it preemptively early is great, and maybe not medication, but sometimes bibliotherapy, recommending a good book to somebody. Therapists do this all the time.
Bibliotherapy.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great thing to do, and if the people are open and willing, they'll. That's an extension of therapy. So when they're away,
So you're not talking about like, are you talking about like a behavioral health book or a self-help book, or are you talking about any book, just relaxing with a good book?
more of a self-help book,
Uh-huh.
one that might talk about releasing anxiety or feeling limited, whatever's appropriate. As a therapist, I have a lot of books that I recommend for different situations, and it is very, very helpful. At times I'll go with the patient. I'll say, let's you and I read this book together, and we'll start from chapter one and read it together, and then we'll talk about it. And that way, it's motivation and accountability too for the patient to read the book. And it is always very helpful.
So in thinking about the capacity for change, so do people change? I mean, what requires people to change from those negative behaviors that we talked about? What's the success rate?
Well, the first thing is willingness. You have to have a willingness and a desire to change. Some people don't think that anything they're doing is wrong. It's their perception of this is the way a man speaks. This is the way a strong woman speaks. This is how a mother speaks. This is what mothers do. That perception is very solid and locked in. There's probably not going to be a lot of willingness or desire for change. So then that has to be challenged. But again, it has to do with your level of comfortability. How do I feel? Am I at ease? Do I feel safe in this situation? Or might I feel better, and might other people around me benefit from some change? And usually it's easy to see, that a little adjustment here, a little adjustment there. I often ask couples, tell me one thing that if your partner changed this one thing, it would make your relationship different. And they'll come up with something just like that. And the other partner will go, well, that's not that much. I'm sure I can do that. And change occurs immediately. And it starts like that.
Wow. I also think, I mean, just seeing my own meditation practice and just quiet and stillness practice, uh, and it's really helped me make changes in my life instead of like being defined by who I thought I was, right? I am, for example, like you said, like a strong-minded woman, and I achieve my goals and nothing stands in my way, right? To kind of soften that perspective and broaden it has been really helpful in improving my relationships with my children, with my mother, with my husband, to kind of let go of these preconceived notions of who we are. I'm not saying be a doormat, obviously, and just anything you want, I'm cool with, but to just be like, well, how can I be more fluid in this situation? How can I make my personality more fluid to get along with all sorts of different people, no matter their communication style, et cetera, while still having healthy boundaries, while still, not getting taken advantage of, and making sure my needs are met by myself and in relationship with other people. So in this time, another vital thing that I wanted to talk to you about was the use of substances during this COVID time. It said that substance abuse rates are going up and people are becoming, turning to alcohol and other drugs more, and it affects relationships with ourselves and with one another. first of all, and it might be self-explanatory to some people, but I think it's important to say, why do people turn to substances during these times?
Mm.
Difficult times.
Again, it could be cultural. I'm an Irish Catholic guy from the East Coast, and where I grew up, there were bars everywhere, and people would have cocktail parties and social events, and alcohol was everywhere. It was the social lubricant, if you will, and it was cultural. And for a person who doesn't have a propensity, some people are born with a biological predisposition to addiction without knowing it. And that's only been found through research within the last maybe 15 years. Um, so drinking is okay if you have a glass of wine or a half a glass of wine a couple of times a week. It's, of course, the abuse of going overboard, take too much alcohol or extra pills. If a doctor prescribes pills, you have to take them as prescribed. When you start to take them as you prescribe, that goes into abuse. Um, and of course, it's all to not feel our feelings.
To not
To
feel our feelings.
Right. And it depends on the level of the substance abuse. If it's mild, the feelings are maybe in the milder to moderate range. If the substance intake or other addictive behavior really increases, then their feelings are much more severe. When a person actually crosses the line into a full-blown addiction, very often they have feelings that they're considering intolerable, absolutely intolerable. I cannot feel this feeling, therefore I know a little glass of vodka will take care of it right away. Intolerable feelings, and they're not the blues or a little anxiety. They're the feelings that say, I'm just not good enough. I'm a broken human being. I'm never going to be successful in life. I can't do that. Those are intolerable feelings that people arrive at, and self-loathing develops. They make mistakes and poor choices, and they blame themselves and criticize and judge themselves and punish themselves. They fall into that range of self-loathing, which is intolerable, and anything will do to not feel that feeling.
So if somebody's in a relationship with someone who is in that cycle of turning to substances for to kind of numb the intolerable feelings, especially during this time, I mean, what are they supposed to do? What do? They leave the relationship? Do they put down ultimatums?
Well, again, it depends on the severity. If the person is into a full-blown addiction, the person doesn't have any choice at that point. You can tell that person, stop, or I'm going to leave, or stop, or I'm going to take your car, stop, or I'm going to anything. And the person will feel bad and they'll go, boy, I really wish I could. There's
But I
nothing they can,
can't.
but I can't. But if they're not at that level yet and they're abusing and it's not going in the right direction, the partner, has to set a boundary and communicate clearly. I'm uncomfortable. I have feelings about this, and it can harm our family. It will be harming the relationship at that point, and it may have caused the person to lose a job and not get a good job. You'd be surprised. So it's just telling that person that this was not acceptable here. So the behavior has to change, and that's a hard thing to say. And you can get a lot of help in addiction. For alcohol, there's another support group called the Al-Anon Family Groups, and that teaches these people in relationship with an alcoholic, which is just a person who's addicted to alcohol. It's still addiction. They can learn more about the disease of addiction. And then the most important thing that people don't realize is they're playing a part in it.
They're
They,
playing a part in it. They're
they
playing a
have a
part in it.
role. They absolutely have a role in it. And it can be as simple as ignoring that it's harmful behavior or not acknowledging that this person is hurting them or not acknowledging that that person is spending their savings, being quiet or helping that person. If the person is using drugs or alcohol, for example, and then they're drunk and they can't get more, and they want more, that person will go buy more alcohol for them. That's enabling. And people get in legal trouble and they bail them out and buy a lawyer and get them out of trouble. Those are enabling behaviors. And that's the other person's role in addiction. So addiction is not just a single person. No one lives in a vacuum. An addict affects everyone in his sphere. And they call it, and alcohol or any addiction will destroy a relationship.
Wow.
It's interesting. It's so a person escaping addiction is almost a phenomenon that doesn't fall under the guise of science. From my experience of working in substance abuse for so many years, I'm just going to go out on a limb because there's no scientific research anywhere that says this will cure a person from addiction. It There isn't anything specifically that is on the books that any treatment center or any physician or any spiritual leader or shaman can come up with. It's random. It is just random. And there are probably some supporting factors. Number one thing is a good, healthy support group. If you have people that really care about you and won't enable you, allow you to make your mistakes and learn and experience the consequences of the behavior from addiction. If they back off and let you have that experience, you're more likely, and this is what they call it sometimes, hit a bottom. And when a person really
Hit
hits,
the bottom.
yeah, and there's no one there to hand them anything else or help them up, they have to get up on their own.
It's very hard though for a family member, right, to like let someone hit bottom, because I mean, we hear stories about people overdosing. I have a friend of mine whose son lived in a different city underneath a pier, and she prayed for him every day and she would call him every day, you know, but and eventually he got he's in recovery now and he's doing really well and is on a great career trajectory. But the idea of being a mother and knowing your son is homeless and he's taking drugs actively in a different city under a pier, to me, that's like, I mean, how can you do that? Like, I mean, it not that how can you do that, but how it must be so hard to think that your son could OD overnight. The next day you call him, he couldn't be there. Like, that's very hard to do.
Well, that's where the beautiful experience of denial comes into play. Denial is a distortion of reality. And that parent may not go to the overdose scenario, but they will have to say, you can't live here anymore. And that is one of the hardest decisions a parent can make.
She
And
did
I've
that.
been there. Yeah.
She did that.
And that's the hardest. The parent has to be in so much pain that they know they're doing it for themselves, because at some point the addict hurts the parent or the loved one, and they'll get a little clean, and the parent will feel hopeful. Oh, thank God! Oh, but then they'll start using drugs again,
Yeah.
and then that hope is gone out the window, and that hurts. That disappointment is one of the most severe hurts you can imagine. And then maybe that the addict will get a little bit more going another program, and they'll have like 6 months without anything. And the parent loved one starts to breathe a little bit because they're holding their breath all this time. Is it going to happen soon? Is it going to happen? They're always waiting for the relapse. And then when it happens again, that pain the parent feels is unbearable. And how many times can you take that pain, that unbearable pain? At some point, it's just too much. And you have to say, well, if I put them out of this house, I have less chance of having to feel that pain.
Wow. I wanted to make sure we touched on that, because I think that given COVID and the financial stressors, that this is a bigger problem than had been in the past. So I think it's really important to talk about what to do when the people you're in relationship with have a substance abuse issue. This kind of wrapping it up. in terms of improving our relationships going forward, we talked about really taking care of ourselves, self-care, and that's like diet, exercise, sleep, processing our own emotions, taking the downtime, knowing that like taking care of ourselves is a job, ideally a fun thing to do, but what else? And then of course, nurturing that relationship with other people, figuring out our triggers, knowing who our parents were and how that is affecting us. Other tips?
Just honoring the differences, honoring and understanding that you and your partner have a lot of differences, and you were attracted, you fell in love with this person because of their differences.
Mhm.
You may not be aware of that at the moment, but that is so true. And another psychological issue that occurs at times is people want their partner to be just like them,
Mhm.
because I know how to do this. I know the right answer. I can tell you how to do that. So just do it the way I do it, and we'll be fine. It's very simple. But people are different because they're attracted. They need that difference. So rather than fighting or challenging or feeling uncomfortable, honoring that and accepting and delving into that a bit. And also make sure that the communication is clear and honesty, always honesty. There's no place in a relationship for secrets. That's another destroyer of relationships. And honesty creates intimacy and vulnerability, which are all elements of a healthy relationship.
I'm writing this stuff down.
And that would take a little bit more thought, because some people feel, well, vulnerability, no way, I can't be vulnerable. That means I get hurt. You may get hurt. There's no life without getting hurt.
Mm.
So clear communication, honesty, and asking for what you need with words when a person is there that they can hear you or on the phone. But it's just that actually asking for what you need, any kind of cooperation or help, or even just listening. Would you please listen to me and hear what I'm trying to say?
This is so powerful. And just hearing you talk about that in relationship and in the context of a romantic relationship, I think these are all great tenets for applying that to a parent-child relationship or sister-sister relationship or adult parent-child relationship, and then our workplace or friendships as well. Embracing differences instead of wanting your coworkers or your friends to be just like you, to embrace it and be like, in that space of difference between you and me, what can I learn?
Mhm.
Because you don't have all, we don't, each of us don't have all the answers. Our perspectives are limited. Like the difference is the potential for, this is what I was alluding to about taking the negative, turning into a positive. You look at it as difference and be like, that's bad, but actually, can you turn it into something good? The clear communication. I mean, if we did that in our workplaces, in our schools, and in our friendships, like how great would that be? And honesty and being vulnerable. And can we be honest and vulnerable and turn that into a strength in our work relationships? Because I think people often so much at work are like strategizing and putting their needs last, or trying to look good in a way where they're fake. And in doing that, can we actually become stronger in our place where we are in our work, or find another workplace which actually honors our ability to be honest and vulnerable and be clear communicators, and so then we can be successful,
Mhm.
instead of sitting in negativity and then manifesting physical disease or mental disease,
Mhm.
because you're not able to manifest your true self. So I think you're I'm so grateful to you for your time. I think the wisdom that you've shared with us, um, can apply to so many different settings. Do you have any final words, Dr. Regan?
Just in the last thing that you said, about the clear communication and being in a situation uh, where you described it as it'll make you stronger. I also see it as it'll just allow your strengths that are already there to come through. And again, I think there's a difference there
Right, right.
because it is more of
You,
the satisfaction of self-expression and the satisfaction of personally being heard for your perspective and your style, your opinion. We have one of the toughest questions people are given in my treatment is list your strengths.
list your strengths. Yeah.
People have a very hard time with that because we're so self-judgmental and self-critical. But we all have great strengths. They're there. And we need to do what it takes to allow them, for us to express them and for them to be seen by everyone.
Wow. Wow. No, I see that difference. I see the difference of just blossoming yourself with all the traits that you have. And then I guess by becoming stronger, I was also talking about growth. So both, I think you need to definitely do this one in order to even grow, right?
I agree.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for our time together, Dr. Regan. I know you have a private practice in Los Angeles and you see patients in person and also remotely, correct?
That's right.
And if you want more information about Dr. Regan, you can check out his website, drchrisregan.com. Thank you so much, Dr. Regan, for our time together. I truly, truly appreciate your wisdom and guidance. And I really hope and pray and put out the intention that we can take this information and grow in our relationships and really make changes within ourselves and our families and ultimately our communities, society, and the world.
Well, thank you. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this. And you're a great interviewer.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day. Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy your day and take this information and create something beautiful with it in your own way. Take care, everybody. Bye.